Hello, everybody. This is Zach's Edit again. I'm your host, Zach Cooley, and I'm honored to be here with international best-selling author Tracey Enerson Wood. She is the author of The President's Wife, which details a historical fictional romance of President Woodrow Wilson and First Lady Edith Bolling Wilson. I have the honor of speaking to Tracey because she will be in Wytheville at the Edith Bolling Wilson Museum to celebrate Wytheville's favorite First Lady's birthday on October 13th. And I am fortunate enough to be there as well as a member of the board of the directors of the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum. Tracey, thank you so much for talking with me this morning. It's an honor to have you on the program.
Well, thank you, Zach. It's an honor for me as well, and any chance I get to talk about this amazing couple and my book, I like to take it, and I'm very excited about coming and presenting at the Edith Bolling Wilson Museum.
Yes, and that is the first thing I wanted to mention. You are coming to Wytheville to help us celebrate. So, what does it mean to you as someone who is obviously connected to Mrs. Wilson as much as you are in writing this very detailed and well thought out and woven with remarkable bits of history? You did a great job with all that. So you obviously have a great connection with Mrs. Wilson. What does it mean to you to come to her hometown to celebrate?
Well, I will be returning, actually, because I came to Wytheville during my research phase, and I fell in love with a little town. I love little Main Street towns that have kept their character and have the same buildings there, and you can walk down the street and people are friendly. And we happened to be there on Halloween, and when I research places, and they're close enough to where my grandchildren live. I have 4 grandchildren living in Virginia. I take them along too. So they came and got some history lessons as well. And since it was Halloween, they were having this street party. I'll never forget it. And of course, my kids weren't kind of prepared for Halloween, but the people just took them under their arms and gave them pumpkin baskets to go around and collect candy up and down the street. And they just had a wonderful, wonderful time. So I really enjoyed walking the steps that Edith and her family had walked, and to be able to return and present in the museum is icing on the cake.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because you mentioned in the acknowledgments of your book this wonderful Halloween event that you took advantage of while being in Wytheville with your grandchildren. And I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I have many wonderful memories as well going on Main Street in Wytheville with my daughter, and that is a very special time. What I love about this book is that, I have been fortunate enough to live in Wytheville for all of my 40 years. There is no other place in the world that I would want to call home. I was born wheelchair-bound with cerebral palsy, and there is no community in the world that I think I would have been as welcome or supported and encouraged to have a career as a writer and a newspaper columnist for 20 years, which is half my life. Wytheville's been a great support to me, so there's no other place I'd rather call home. So as a result, most of what we're going to talk about is the connections to Wytheville that you have mentioned in your novel, because there are certain things that I just love where you draw back from whatever Mrs. Wilson is going through, whether it is helping the president after he has had a stroke, acting as the first unofficial female president of the United States, or, just being, even before President Wilson was incapacitated, she was his number one advisor. He sought her opinion for everything, and she very openly gave a wise observation. So, but in these times, whatever she may be going through, whether it is an issue of should I marry this man so soon after his wife has passed, she draws from memories of her hometown. And I love that you take her back to her roots in so many things. There's nothing more important to someone, particularly a fellow writer who loves his hometown, to see his hometown mentioned so vividly and colorfully in an internationally best-selling book. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
And so some of the things, you go right back into, like, she's touring the White House, and she sees certain things like the cherubs and the curlicue style of the furniture, and it puts her in mind of the furniture that she had in her childhood home, which you have obviously visited when you made that reference. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think Edith, like many of us, was always seeking home. Mm-hmm. I think she basically had a happy childhood growing up, and I know she fussed about being homeschooled most of the time when the other siblings, of which there are many, of course, got to go off to school and had to stay home and take care of her bedbound grandmother. So she, kind of mixed feelings about it. But I think for the rest of her life, as a lot of us do, she was just seeking home, that place where you were loved, where you knew where that special chair was, and you could count on things, and you can count on people. And then she moved off from this beautiful, warm, welcoming hometown that you so lovely described into Washington, D.C., which is, hugely different. I know she was an adventurer, but she actually had followed, of course, her older sister there. But I think even there in Washington, D.C., she lived in the townhouse, of course, with her husband, Mr. Galt of the jewelry store. But that home, although it's been destroyed, unfortunately, there are many photographs of it, and you can see, and also in her writings, the furniture she used, in which I described as well in the book, mm-hmm. which is, of the period, but not the real fancy curly. She liked more of the East Lake simple design because, again, that reflects more of what she grew up with, and she was always seeking that home. And I think her experience with her grandmother held her in good stead when then she had to also take care of her own husband later on.
And this is probably my favorite wink to Wytheville, if you will. You refer to her southern drawl. And as you can tell, me spending my 40 years in Wytheville, you can tell that I've got it. And her being from Wytheville, Virginia, there are so many times that I would have loved to have heard Edith Wilson speak as the First Lady, because I want to listen to her and say, do you sound like you're still from Wytheville, or or have you cityfied your accent, if you will. So I love that you've made vivid descriptions of her southern drawl and the fact that she was true to the roots of her hometown. My 10-year-old daughter is a big Taylor Swift. She's a Swiftie, and I me being an old rock and roller, I just don't get it, you know. But she tries to talk through her nose and have this modern talk. And, you know, and I just want to say, and I tell her all the time, girl, you are from Wytheville, Virginia. You better talk like it, you know. So, the fact that Edith stayed true to her southern drawl, at least in your book, I found very, it made me chuckle, but I found it very enduring as well.
Yeah, and I curse, you know, we don't have recordings that I
Right.
know of her as she was a first lady, but I have to imagine that she kept that lovely, lovely Virginia drawl, which I think was one of the reasons that people were drawn to her. You know, during World War I, how she just went out and met with the soldiers at Union Station and talked to them and welcomed them, and she became very much a beloved first lady. And I think much of that again goes back to Wytheville and how she grew up and the friendliness of it and that beautiful, beautiful draw. It doesn't make you feel like, you know, she's putting on airs kind of thing. You know, I think she presented herself as who she was, a kind and smart woman.
Exactly. And when Edith and Woodrow are in their courting stages and they're having a romantic stroll along the Connecticut River, and she sees the wildflowers, and she's immediately brought back to home. I thought that was a beautiful scene. There are several scenes that you describe in the book, like her and her sister putting buttercups under their chin to see if their face glowed properly, and if it did, it meant they liked butter, you know, and all of these things that brought her back to her hometown, which I thought was lovely. So how much of that was authentic, and how much of that was your poetic license?
Well, that's a good question, and I've forgotten about that scene. And actually, I never read in history that Edith did that, but that is something that I did with my friends as a child. And it just kind of brought back for me those warm childhood memories and connection with nature and wildflowers. But what I did do is research that those buttercup flowers did indeed grow in Wytheville, Virginia.
Certainly.
I grew up in New Jersey, but it was my invention that would have been something she did as a child, as I did.
And then we come to the part of Wytheville that I dread every year, and that's wintertime in Wytheville, because having CP and being wheelchair bound, wintertime cold weather always makes me hurt. And the snow that comes, and we do have a lot of snow here in the mountains, but Mr. and Mrs. Wilson are on their honeymoon, and she sees the snow, and it reminds her of winter, and again makes her homesick for Wytheville. And she's telling the president, you know, I'm sick for home. And President Wilson was born in Stanton, about 3 hours away, and he said, you know, we must go back and visit our hometowns. And I don't think President Wilson ever came here, but you can just imagine what that would have meant to Wytheville to have a president visit us. You know, that would have been...
I looked, I did not find that he went to Wytheville. I do believe he went to Stanton. But I couldn't find that, so I therefore didn't put that in the book, that they went back to Wytheville and visited as President and First Lady.
She went back to Wytheville just before she died to dedicate some stained glass windows in the St. John's Episcopal Church, which you mentioned, the St. John's Episcopal Church, where my daughter attended preschool as a 3 and 4 year old, I may add.
Wow.
My sister did too. They have a wonderful preschool program for 3 and 4 year olds. But Mrs. Wilson attended that church, and before she died in 1961, like months before, she came to dedicate some stained glass windows with her parents' names on them. And you mention that church, and if I have any of that wrong, I'm sure Farron is going to correct me quickly on that. But
I know she went and dedicated everything she possibly could. She did everything she could to protect and preserve Woodrow's legacy. And of course, as you know, she was going to go to the dedication of the Woodrow Wilson Bridge on December 28, 1961, I believe.
yes,
And of course, that was the day she died. So
she died that day.
yeah, but that was her life afterwards. You know, and hosting the new first ladies as they came in, Democrat, Republican, didn't matter. That was her life. She remained completely dedicated to her, where she came from, and to helping others and preserving his legacy. It was never about. I never got the impression that it was all about herself.
No, definitely not. And spoiler alert here, if you have not read the book, skip this next minute or so, but you depicted her last day so beautifully at the end. That that was just, you couldn't have done that any better, in my opinion. Because we would all like to think that that's how she was thinking and feeling that day.
Yeah, I just have no doubt. I have no doubt that's what she felt. That okay, I've done all I could to protect you, my love, and he was calling her on his birthday to come be with him again.
That's right. It was
such a beautiful love story. That love story is one of the things that just drew me to this story. I had to write it.
Yes, and very glad you did. Thank you for making our hometown, painting it in the light it deserves, I believe. And then there are so many other things. I was talking about the St. John's Episcopal Church. I'm glad I didn't forget this. You mentioned her church because she has to listen to Woodrow Wilson's daughter kind of do this warbling operatic soprano version of the Star Spangled Banner, and she has to grin and grit through her teeth. She's listening to this warbling version of Woodrow Wilson's daughter sing the Star Spangled Banner, and she's having to kind of grit her teeth and grin and say, yes, it was wonderful. But in her mind, she's thinking of the hymns that she used to hear in that church that is very near her home, which I pass by almost every day. So just bring my hometown, what I see every day, to life in an internationally prominent book was very special to me personally.
Good. I'm so glad. I'm glad you picked up on that theme of home.
And because if Wytheville is home to you, it's home like no other place. And I have to, when you're from Wytheville, you feel the very heart of it. And you make it very clear that Mrs. Wilson felt the same way. So, and there's other things that you mention that bring her back to home, sledding in the winter and drinking cocoa, which obviously I don't do a lot of sledding, but we do a lot of cocoa in the wintertime, so that put me in mind of my own, home memories. And one thing in particular you mentioned that we have to talk about is the sheep that they used to graze the grass, because these are the days, everybody has riding mowers these days, but you didn't even have push mowers back in those days, and you had sheep to graze the lawn. And then you have Farron Farron wrote the book about the sheep grazing the lawn. Joyce Covey, I think, is her name. They did a children's book about the sheep who grazed the lawn at the White House, and the reason they did that is because it was Edith Bolling Wilson's idea, a girl who grew up in Wytheville and saw that being done, so she decided to bring sheep to the White House so they could do the same. So,
yeah,
I thought
that was a neat connection. I love the sheep, and I love bringing them into the book and several times. And when I do my slide presentation, I have a historical photograph of the sheep on the White House lawn, and I always tell my listeners that if you see a picture of the White House and the White House grounds, and you see sheep on the grounds, that you know that picture was taken during the Woodrow Wilson administration, because it's the only time the sheep were allowed there.
Absolutely.